confidence in the U.S. president. Today, that number is 22%. The only countries that had more confidence in Trump than in Obama were Russia and Israel. We are back for a special edition of GPS in Aspen, Colorado, with Walter Isaacson, Nancy Gibbs, Jeffrey Goldberg, and Dan Senor. Dan, the last time we saw such low numbers was when you were president and you worked for George
They're
Bush.
all my presidents.
George Bush was,
Yes.
but it was really more about
Yes.
the Iraq War.
Right.
And it was about the sense that the war had gone horribly, had alienated the world. What's striking about this is he's barely done anything. And he has numbers that it took Bush 6 years of a badly prosecuted Iraq war to get to.
I feel like much of the world is embarrassed for us, embarrassed watching what this man is doing so far to the presidency on the one hand. That's the population, but these populations globally. But I think it's important to draw a distinction between them and their governments. And if you spend time with, officials in Sunni Gulf governments, they say they'll take Trump any day over the Obama administration. Certainly the Israeli government's view. Now, it's certainly not Europe's view. So I think it's important to draw a distinction here with the government.
China, for example, they have a good working relationship with him.
Right. Now, they're not exactly sure where things are going. And you say, look, we have great meetings. He says all the right things behind closed doors. We're not sure what the follow-up is going to be. But they do like the change. I
got to ask you, because we have two great experts on this, what sense did it make for Jared Kushner to go to the Middle East to suddenly, heroically, in 12 hours, produce peace between the Israelis and Palestinians?
I'm gonna go a little contrary on this one, which is to say the following. Well, baseline, there's no reason for any president to even try to pursue this right now. It's not possible. Peace is possible, but it's not available right now, so it's no point in wasting your time. That said, there's nothing more absurd about sending your son-in-law to the Middle East to try this than sending a series of ineffective secretaries of state. There is some value in the president sending a personal family emissary to a country where those kind of connections are valued. So
but at this point, and it was for 12 hours.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about the fifth most important conflict in the Middle East right now. I would prefer this administration to be focused on the conflicts that are tearing apart the world, namely Syria, Iraq, Yemen. So it doesn't make any sense. It's a little bit of a vanity project, obviously.
What I'm struck by, Walter, is the way in which he's ratcheted up everywhere. Because I guess the generals tell him, give us a few more troops in Afghanistan, give us bigger bombs or more bombing in Syria. But let's do more to support the Saudis in Yemen. But what is the strategy?
Well, I do think that Donald Trump is somebody who inside really doesn't want to get us involved with more troops in more places. So as we slide into Afghanistan more and more, that seems odd to me that he hasn't stopped that. The strategy could be, I'm not sure, but it seems like he's decided to have a Sunni coalition of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, which, means that they're going to try to isolate Qatar, which has some drawbacks. If that were part of a coherent, thought-out strategy, you could argue, okay, that might be the way to approach it if you think Iran is the biggest threat in the region. But my problem with this administration is I'm not sure this is a clearly thought-out strategy of let's have a Sunni alliance with the United States, with Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the lead, or whether it's just something that got stumbled upon.
Nancy, what a lot of people point out is that if you have these high disapproval ratings that Trump has in all these countries, the problem is, it's not a popularity contest, international relations, but do you think that he cares about this popularity? I mean, he's somebody so obsessed with his image.
I think one way in which he cares is that his focus on the comparison between him and President Obama is intense. You almost never hear him talking about other former presidents, but Obama comes up all the time. And so to the extent that Obama was seen as a much more globalist figure who was welcomed with these enormous crowds, particularly, won the Nobel Peace Prize after he'd been in office for an hour and a half, I think that is the comparison that this president finds haunting.
Before we go, I want to ask Dan, come back to this issue of the rifts within the Republican Party. Where do you think the Republican Party is on this issue of engagement with the world, leading the world, bombing the hell out of the world, and just ignoring it?
Republicans historically have followed the lead on these things of their commander-in-chief. If their commander-in-chief is quasi-isolationist, which is sort of how George W. Bush ran in 2000, he changed after September 11th. Republicans were on board with that campaign in 2000, and then after September 11th, they were all in on the Bush doctrine. I think most Republicans, members of Congress today, I mean, you saw when Obama tried to do something in Syria, most Republican members of Congress didn't want to do anything. That would be their inclination now, if that's where Trump is. But if Trump is deferring and delegating to Mattis and McMaster, which he clearly is doing, what he did in Syria and what he did with his troop increase in Afghanistan.
I think they're pretty aggressive.
They're very aggressive. And, you know, I think a lot of Republicans say, well, two generals, they served in Afghanistan, both of them, they know something. If Trump is willing to get behind them, we'll get behind them. And so I just think they'll follow Trump's lead. Congressional Republicans are not going to try to, by and large, there are exceptions, but by and large, they are not going to lead on foreign policy. They're going to follow Trump.
Fascinating conversation. We got to stop.